Not one for yet.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to Knock Once for Yes.
Apologies that we're a bit late with the episode this month. Things have been a bit up in the air. Those of you that follow our social media will be aware of some of what's been going on, but in summation, obviously the lockdown disrupted our plans for this month and the next few, and on top of that, the PC went pop. We've got it fixed now, but did lose some research and annoyingly my office install. Lil's working from home full-time, which you might have thought would give us more time to record, but actually means that I have to share the studio during the week, and I have to do some of my work in the evenings and weekends when we'd normally work on the podcast. On top of that, I'm in a high-risk group as I'm a delicate little flower, which you'll have seen from the videos, which means that I'm not allowed out of the house to do any shopping or errands, and of course that puts more pressure on Lil, who's already got rather a lot on her plate. It's quite a stressful situation, and we've both been pretty busy.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the whole pandemic situation has definitely been starting to take a toll on us both mentally, and I'm sure it's affecting many of you guys in similar ways as well. Our offer is still open for a chat via Skype, and we would encourage you to talk to us and each other in the Facebook group as well, or pop us an email if you feel more comfortable doing it that way. As you know, we've always been very open talking about mental health because we strongly believe that it's important to normalise having conversations about mental health in all aspects of life. And yes, that means in the paranormal as well. But that is more important than ever in these very difficult circumstances. Personally, I found it very hard to concentrate recently. I've had lots of ideas still flying around in my head, but not necessarily the focus to put them into action. I do seem to have the attention span of a gnat right now. But we did manage to get cracking with some of our plans, including a special fireside spooky story video special, so do go and check it out on our YouTube channel if you haven't already.
We're also still taking questions for our Q&A episode, so please keep sending in your questions at contact@knockonceforyes.com.
But now, on with the show and Fitz. What do we have coming up on today's episode?
Coming up, we have ghosts on patrol and phone calls from the dead on the paranormal radar. We've got listener stories from Lucy, Rebecca and Georgia, and we bring back some voices that you might find familiar from last episode as we speak to Corrine and Alex of, well, lots of things, as you'll find out.
But before we get stuck into all of that, we want to say a great big huge thank you to our latest patrons.
Michelle Soulier,
Melissa Duncan,
Tanta,
April Gatlin,
Ruthie Joy,
Mary Pelham,
Wendy Edwards,
Line Brogard,
Max,
Kathy Thomas,
Gerardo Herrera,
Michelle Laukner,
Rhonda Hagen,
Erin O'Donnell,
and welcome back to Ben Jackson Ling.
We'd also like to say thank you to Annie Corradio and Jessica Noche for upping their pledges.
And thank you to Wendy and Tiff at the Hippie Hut Studio for making a donation through coffee.
Thank you so much, guys. We've been absolutely bowled over by the support this month. And as always, thank you to all of our patrons, old and new. We say it every time, but it's absolutely true. We could not do this without you. And it just means the world to us that you're choosing to support us on this weird, wonderful, spooky, and hopefully interesting journey.
I do need to mention at this point that any of you that might be waiting for patron rewards, there may be a slight delay. This is due to the fact that we've been asked as a country to not send anything non-essential through the post because I think the posties are a bit overloaded dealing with everybody staying at home at the moment, and it's getting a little bit difficult to actually get the rewards in the first place as well.
Yeah, as you can imagine, deliveries in the country are just through the roof because everybody's getting anything they can delivered. So we just don't want to add to that workload at the moment. And we have a tiny little countryside post office that's barely any room for, two people to get in. So it doesn't feel like a very safe environment at the moment. So I hope you understand, as soon as things ease up and we're in a better situation, we will get those deliveries out to you.
Yeah, we are keeping a record of everything that's due to everybody.
Yep.
So we will get it out. If you want to get in touch and just question anything, feel free to get in touch. That's fine. We'll let you know exactly what the position is in person.
We really don't want you to think that we've forgotten any of you. We haven't, we promise.
But in the meantime, we hope you've been enjoying the extra patron videos we've been putting out. and I've also got a few more planned coming up for you, so keep an eye out for those as well.
So Fitz, what's first up today on the Paranormal Radar?
Today, I'm afraid we're going to have to mention the dreaded pandemic, but just because there have been some pretty inventive methods employed to make people stay indoors, some might even say supernatural. This story comes from Kepa village in Indonesia, where authorities have been sending ghosts out into the street in a bid to scare the residents into staying indoors. Of course, they haven't rounded up gangs of actual undead, but they've dressed up actors as Pokong, the most feared ghost of local legend, and sent the spooks out to roam the streets wrapped in their ghoulish burial shrouds to frighten any wandering locals swiftly back indoors. The Pokong, or shroud ghosts, are believed in Indonesian and Malaysian culture to be the trapped souls of the dead. In Islamic burials, the bodies of the dead are wrapped in a shroud, which is a length of white cloth tied under the feet, around the neck, and over the top of the head. The souls of the dead are said to remain on Earth for a time, and it's thought that the ties of the burial shroud must be undone to release the soul when the time comes for them to move on. If this is not done, then the deceased will begin to haunt the living, appearing wrapped in their shroud to warn people to release their ties. The unusual deterrent was a joint effort between the Kepa police and a local youth group as a means to enforce the social distancing measures advised by the government. The village head, Priyadi, said that residents lacked awareness about how to curb the spread of COVID-19 and wanted to continue with their normal lives, so the initiative was thought up to spread awareness and keep people from congregating in the streets. At first, the ghosts had the opposite effect, and as news of the ghosts spread, people rushed outside to catch a glimpse of them for themselves. But the organisers changed tactics, sending the Pekong volunteers out on surprise patrols to catch the locals off guard. Apparently, this worked far better, with many residents sent scurrying home in fright after a surprise encounter with one of the apparitions. According to locals, the lurking ghosts are a stark reminder of the risks of spreading the virus, and residents no longer gather or remain on the streets after dark. Meanwhile, here in England, we may not have had an official, coordinated attempt to use scare tactics to keep people indoors, but one person of unknown identity took it upon themselves to spook the residents of Helston near Norwich by taking their once-a-day exercise dressed in a plague doctor's outfit. The sight of the tall figure in flowing black robes and eerie beaked mask was enough to send some residents running for home and bring local children to tears. The infamous plague doctor costumes of the 17th century consisted of an ankle-length black overcoat, wide-brimmed hat, full face mask with glass eyes and a long, almost hooked beak, giving the whole ensemble a rather terrifying effect, somewhat like that of a looming half-man, half-bird creature. The purpose of the beak was to be stuffed with aromatic herbs, as it was thought that the plague was caused by bad air and that sweet-smelling herbs would protect the wearer. Paranormal? Maybe not. But spooky? Oh yes. Although many residents saw the humour and the irony, Norfolk Police did say they were aware of the situation and had now spoken to the character, offering a few words of advice about the effects of his actions on some people in the community.
I laugh now, but if I'd been out on my early morning walk and come across that striding across the fields, I'm sure I wouldn't have been laughing quite so hard.
Well, the picture they showed was broad daylight, so it looked to me like he was just, having a laugh and walking. Yeah, but like you say, if he'd gone out late at night...
Yeah, that wouldn't have been funny.
Yeah, because it's been really hot recently and I've been doing my sort of walks at sort of 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Well, also, that's the best time to avoid other people and practice social distancing. So, yeah, we've gone on a few late night ones when the streets have been very eerily still and quiet. And, yeah, if that figure walked out of the shadows at that point, yeah, I might have been running for home.
Yeah, I think we'd have we'll go the other way.
Yeah, legged it.
Well, I think you've got a story for us as well on the Paranormal Radar.
I do. And now this isn't a new story, but it's something that caught my eye because in our last episode, we briefly mentioned Konstantin Raudive and his phone call from beyond the grave. Well, since then, I've seen several documented cases of people apparently receiving phone calls from loved ones long after they've passed away. We could fill a whole episode with these, but for today, I just wanted to share one. Because some of these stories can be quite vague, sometimes they come down to mainly rumours and hearsay, but this one is particularly well documented because it happened to author Dean Koontz, and he's spoken and written about it several times. The mysterious incident took place in 1988 when Dean was working in his office. It was just a normal autumn day until the telephone rang. The woman's voice on the other end sounded strangely distant, but even stranger than that, it sounded eerily like Dean's mother, only she had passed away nearly 20 years ago. "Please be careful," said the voice with a tone of urgency. "Who is this?" Dean replied, knowing that his number was unlisted, so it was highly unlikely that this was a prank call. But the voice merely repeated the words, "Please, be careful." The female voice repeated the warning 3 more times, each time sounding further away as if it was fading into the distance. Unsure of what to think of the unsettling incident, he spoke of it only to his wife, wondering if it was just a wrong number. But it made him slightly wary, concerned that maybe there was something he needed to be careful of. The words would come back to haunt him just a couple of weeks later, when he visited his father in the facility in which he was living. The author's visit had been requested by the staff at the facility because his father had been exhibiting some serious behavioural problems. Unfortunately, during this visit, his father pulled out a hidden knife and tried to attack his son. I guess we'll never know if Dean was more alert because of the eerie telephone message he'd received, but thankfully he managed to wrestle the knife away from his father and exited the room unharmed. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. Staff had alerted the police during the struggle, and when Dean emerged from the room clutching the knife that he'd prized out of his father's hands, he was faced with armed police, who mistakenly thought that he was the attacker. Quickly realising the predicament he was in, Dean dropped the knife and the police soon saw the truth of the situation, but it was a second disaster, narrowly averted. The author has stated that he doesn't quite know what to make of the mysterious phone call. Sometimes he thinks it was the voice of his long-dead mother, and sometimes he thinks it must have been a simple case of a wrong number, although a very strange and coincidental one to say the least. At any rate, he never received another phone call like it, so the phantom caller remains a mystery, but maybe, just maybe, by alerting him to the coming danger, they might have saved his life.
Oh, that's an interesting one. It does give me chills.
I know. I had to include that one when I came across it, but there are quite a lot of these phone calls from Beyond the Grave story. Might have to look into it a bit further because once I started looking, they just kept coming.
Yeah, and the article that you got this from was a very interesting read, and of course we'll link it in the show notes so you can have a look as well. There's quite a few common themes that come up in it as well that are very interesting. So yeah, I think we might need to look into that a bit further.
It deserves a bit more exploration.
Indeed. Well, before we end up diving down that particular rabbit hole, prepare yourself for some more chills from our first listener story, and this one is from Lucy.
I've worked in the same building for almost 15 years, and as it's one of the oldest in its area of the city and the frontage is listed, I've always been interested in what little I could find out about its history. It's a 3-story red brick building, roughly in the shape of a letter C, with exits at either end and the main entrance and exit in the middle. The two exits at the building's extremities are both fire exits and cannot be opened without the fire alarm sounding. According to a recent building survey, the building was built around 1830, and as far as I can trace back, was an iron foundry works and then went on to specialise in Japanware, and is located very near the main hub of the city's industrial canals. The building has many lovely original features still intact, including an archway for coaches, although a glass front door now fills the arch, a gas light fixture at the rear of the building, an original well, now cemented up, and a brick fireplace and hearth on an exterior car park wall, which must have at one time been an interior wall, probably for one of the foundry site offices. From early plans of the building, the now open car park used to have buildings over some of it, so this would make sense. In the first half of the 20th century, the foundry works were sold to an electrical company, who used it as their site and offices until the current company took up residence in the late 80s and has since been an office. The building has been remodelled many times over the years. Some of this is old and visible, like windows and doors that are now bricked over, and some more recently as the building has been upgraded. Most of this recent remodelling has happened within the time that I have worked here. I've worked all over the building, which, given its size, isn't overly populated with staff. A maximum of about 40, but most days probably no more than 20 people on average, which isn't many given the vast size of the office space. Currently, the top floor is not in use. I'd been working here some weeks and nothing had ever been mentioned to me about any paranormal activity or strange occurrences. It wasn't something that had cropped up during team meetings or on a tea break. So my initial experiences were without external influence. As an early riser, I was usually one of the first staff members in and had a key, one of about 4 staff keys that I can unlock the building with, knowing I was on my own. I then worked on the top floor, tucked around a corner, and most days would be busy answering emails quietly. I was never worried about being here. I never felt that I was not welcome. I did, however, start to notice a pattern. The door into my area of the office from the main staircase would creak loudly on opening, and I noticed this as it usually meant company. I would clearly hear someone walking towards my end of the office, although around the corner so I couldn't see anything. At times, I would pop up to greet whoever it might be and offer a cup of tea, but there was never anyone there. Once this had happened a few times, I found myself almost waiting for it to happen and paid more attention to it. There were always 12 footsteps that I could hear before they stopped, which would take someone about midway through that section of the office towards me. I never noticed it unless the office was quiet, but then I wouldn't, because even if I heard it, I would assume it was a genuine person and nothing unusual. I eventually mentioned it to a friend and colleague who smiled knowingly and asked me to go and ask a couple of specific colleagues for their experiences of something similar. I wasn't ready for some of the personal experiences I heard. The one that relates to my experience most specifically was from a colleague who had worked there a little longer than I had and recalled the office space where I worked when it was individual rooms rather than open plan, which it is now. He recalls having a meeting one day with his line manager in a small room on the top floor near where I currently worked. Only when he arrived for his meeting, he found his boss was in there working at her computer with a man seated at the small meeting table near her desk. My colleague went away thinking she had forgotten their meeting or that her current meeting had overrun. Later that day, his boss found him and asked where he'd been as he'd missed their meeting. When he said that he'd come at the right time but found her with a man in her room, so had gone away again, She responded chillingly that she'd been on her own all morning. An unknown man has been seen again in this same area, but the story came to me third hand, so I won't recount it here. On further investigation, this former office space where this man had been seen was 12 paces from the door that I'd heard opening many times when I was alone in the morning. Maybe I hadn't been on my own as I'd thought. Once my curiosity had been piqued, lots of colleagues came to tell me their experiences. They all seemed genuine and had no reason not to be. A lot of them were accounts of auditory phenomena such as whistling when no one was there, and someone singing or humming Amazing Grace in one area of the building, which was on the top floor. A cosy, small staff room with clear lines of sight so you could see if anyone had been the real cause of the noise. I myself experienced a whistle here, and it did frighten me because it was very close to my ear, and I could almost feel the sensation of breath that came with the whistle. I was out of there like a shot. The lift would operate on its own and travel up and down between the top floor and ground floor with no one activating it. Lights would turn themselves on and off, and despite thinking this could all be dodgy old wiring, it was investigated in one of the refurbishments, and everything was fine. Clocks stopped throughout the building for no reason, even with new batteries. Several colleagues have driven past the building at night when the office was closed, only to report that all the lights were turned on. We had a long-standing cleaner, Jim, who said this was common, and as he was the last to leave each evening and lock the building up, he would get annoyed at our resident ghost, because after locking up he frequently had to unlock and switch off the lights that had come on before locking up again to go home. He'd seen the unidentified man and described him as wearing a drab janitor-style coat, average height and past middle age. It is interesting that anyone who claims to have seen this entity doesn't see a shadow or movement out of the corner of an eye. They look like you or I, a person taking up space. The only negative experience anyone has ever recounted was that of a female colleague having their hair pulled and hearing "get out" loudly in their ear. This individual had particularly long hair that wasn't ever tied back, so the skeptic in me thought she could have caught her hair on something. She'd been at the base of one of the far staircases at the time, testing a fire alarm call point there, a routine task. I saw her soon after the incident happened, and she seemed genuinely afraid, the hair standing out on her arms like goosebumps, and whatever she'd experienced, real or imagined, her fear was genuine. I mentioned that as a key holder, I often unlocked the building in the morning. This was always the time that I would notice footsteps overhead when on the ground or first floor. It sounded like the building was occupied, when I knew it couldn't possibly be. My then partner, now husband, would also hear the noises, but as he doesn't like anything to do with the paranormal, he would do his best to ignore it and wouldn't discuss it. He couldn't avoid it one morning, though. We'd just opened up the building together and were coming up the central staircase, bearing in mind the office was empty apart from ourselves, and we heard an alarm sound from the ground floor. We dashed down there, and it was the emergency alarm in our accessible toilet, which can only be activated by pulling firmly on a red pull cord with a triangular handle at the bottom of it. I reset the alarm, but we were still alone in the building, and we looked at each other, not a little afraid and bemused. That same morning, I went to one of the kitchenettes to warm a bowl of porridge in the microwave. Thinking nothing of this everyday routine, I waited patiently for the couple of minutes it took and heard the nearby office door open and someone walking in. I knew who this would be so early in this part of the office and called out a greeting of "morning" to her. I saw a shadow move across the sunlit wall as if she was behind me, only to turn around and find she wasn't there. But stranger than that, no one was there in that area of the office at all. No one had come through the door or walked in my direction. The office was quiet and empty. I've heard many different experiences, nearly all first-hand and seemingly genuine. Activity has been more prevalent at times when we've been redecorating the building or having building work undertaken, which seems a common theme in haunted properties. We have had builders ask if the building was haunted after they had experienced activity. It seems that builders sometimes have the best ghost stories. You just need to encourage them a bit to start to tell them. Here it was nothing major. Plug sockets being turned on again and again after being switched off, and probably annoyed them more than scared them. We did have a colleague who I would describe as sensitive, and although he wouldn't talk about it, experienced seeing people that no one else could. He worked for us on a freelance basis, perhaps only in the building once a month, and he clearly saw the janitor-styled man. But more interesting was when he was placed in one of the ground floor meeting rooms and came out without finishing what he was doing to move rooms. He asked us not to put him in there again, and when asked why, he confided to one colleague he was close to that they all wouldn't stop talking to him. After digging a little deeper, he finally confided that he could hear the distressed voices of a group of people who had died in the cellar space underneath that room. They'd used it as an air raid shelter in World War II, but had tragically been gassed to death in there one night, in the Blitz, when a gas main down the street was struck by a bomb. We only have his word for this, and try as I might, I've never been able to authenticate the incident. But then I'm not sure if it would even have been recorded in any great detail, as so many were lost in great numbers during those bombing raids on Britain's main cities. I have, however, found a record of the bomb that hit the nearby gas main, which destroyed the area about 50 metres away down the road that our building is on. We may never know what really happened, but if true, it's so tragic. He never worked in that room again, and stopped working for us altogether within a year of this occurrence. We've never been able to access the cellar underneath this room. The cellar had asbestos in it, and since being treated has remained out of bounds to staff. The most recent activity experienced was witnessed by a group of colleagues in the currently most populated and well-used area of the office. At the end of a long winter's day, darkness had fallen early outside, and they were chatting at desks, waiting to go home. Suddenly, a bell rang out clearly. I should explain that it's a real bell. Our office manager has a service bell on his desk, one of the flatter domed type bells that you tap to ring. The strangest thing was that no one was within 10 feet of the desk when it happened, and it was loud, clear, and stopped them all in their tracks to ask what on earth had caused it.
Wow, Lucy, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. There's just so much. Where do you start on that one? Like, the first thing that jumped out at me was the number of steps. Like, she counted the 12 steps, and it turned out that that was the
apparition was 12 steps away. I know, that was amazing.
And that reminded me of a story we had in episode 1 with the man, where the man climbed up the stairs and you could count the number of stairs that he was climbing.
Goodness me, I'd forgotten about that one. Yeah,
that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
There's when she was making coffee in the morning and she felt that somebody was behind her. That reminded me of you experiencing Jack for the first time.
Yeah, that got me as well.
And not only did she have all these experiences, but she also investigated the building.
Yep.
How cool is your boss when you go, do you mind if I do a paranormal investigation in the office one night? So, yeah, fine, whatever. Awesome. But yeah, so they investigated the clocks. because they kept stopping and they put a camera up and the camera kept breaking. Like
the camera wouldn't take a
and...
photo. She sent us a little rundown of the investigation notes. So as soon as they tried to take a picture of these clocks that kept stopping as part of the record of the investigation, the camera just failed. And I think they had battery drainage issues as well, which is pretty classic.
Yeah, they were getting sort of a common theme of hearing people moving about and doing things in the other parts of the building. The other thing that jumped at me that I really liked was the custodian, when he was just like, oh, they turn the lights on, I have to go back in. And it's like brilliant. It didn't seem scared at all. It's just just locked up.
He was just annoyed at the fact that he had to go back and do his job all over again because the ghost had turned the lights on again.
Yeah, if any of you were sort of Buffy and Angel fans, it just reminded me of Cordelia's Phantom Dennis.
Phantom Dennis.
Phantom Dennis.
Yeah, stop that Phantom Dennis. Oh, that was brilliant. The other thing she reported as part of the investigation was phantom smell. They had they were in a room, they left the area briefly, and when they came back, there was a sort of disinfectant-y clinical cleaning smell that hadn't been there before. Obviously, sort of cleaning product type smell isn't an unusual smell in a building like an office, but if it hadn't been there when they just left and then come back very soon after and they were the only people in the building, it's not something that you would expect to just kind of spring out of nowhere.
Yeah, it is a bit weird.
And the lights mysteriously turning themselves on and off happened
they experienced
as well.
that as well. Like the same thing that happened to the sort of custodian happened again while they were there.
And
really interesting.
One of the rooms that happened in was actually inaccessible, so it couldn't have been one of them.
Creepy. Be nice if we could get in there to investigate one day.
You want to go anywhere to investigate.
Yeah, once lockdown's over, we've got to go and start.
Fitz has got a bit of cabin fever. Can't wait to get out onto an investigation. But thank you so much, Lucy. That was a fantastic story. And thank you for the investigation notes as well. They did add to it.
Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating to read through.
Well, more listener stories coming up for you right now. And I'm going to hand over to Fitz, who's going to read us Rebecca's story.
My mum's sister and I went through a period of having some telepathic and prophetic dreams and experiences, with a possible haunting mixed in. This all takes place in around 1999 to 2002. When my sister and I were 19 and 18, we'd recently both left to live away for university. We had some odd experiences, as if our brains had not caught up with the fact that we were not all living under one roof anymore. In the autumn term of my second year, when I'd just gone back, I had a very vivid dream one night that there were burglars in my parents' house. I didn't get a good look at who they were, but in the dream I was very worried because I knew my parents were asleep upstairs. I was watching the burglary as if on TV, so couldn't intervene or wake my parents up. The dream made such an impression on me that I decided to ring my mum, which was unusual. I was usually too busy down the pub and at parties, and sometimes the library, to do so more than once a week. And also I had a very clunky and unreliable pay-as-you-go mobile phone, which cost me a lot of money, so as a broke student I tried not to use it too much. Also at the back of my mind was that when I was a little girl, only about 8 or 9, I'd had a vivid dream about what I thought was the end of the world. A big storm outside, and my whole school made to go and sit in the assembly hall. And 18 months later, when a huge electrical storm struck the school's electricity substation and some classrooms flooded, I found myself evacuated to the assembly hall, with every other pupil in the school living exactly the same experience I had dreamed so long before, like one long day of déjà vu. When I explained the burglary dream to my mum, she went very quiet for a moment and then said, "Have you been speaking to your sister?" I confirmed I hadn't. She and I usually emailed each other, again to save money on our primitive phones. Mum went on to explain that my sister had called earlier that day to tell her the same thing. She'd had a very vivid dream about my parents' house being burgled. It wasn't an identical dream to mine, but people were trying to break in, and she'd had the dream the same night I had mine. My sister was, like me, concerned enough to call and tell my mum about it. My dad was always very security conscious, but for both me and my sister, the odd feel of the dream made us ring home, especially to pass it on. My mum and I agreed it was all a bit weird, and then I rang off and went about my student business, probably back to the pub again. 2 days later, I got a call from my mum, who, when I picked up the phone, began with, "Your dream came true." At first I was confused, but then understood what she was telling me. The previous night, a gang of burglars had gone through our whole street with fishing rods and some special adapters on the end, which they used to fish through everyone's letterbox. Most people in the street had one, which was set in the front door and led directly into the hallway. So many people keep their keys in a dish or on a little table by the front door that all the burglars needed to do was fish them out through the letterbox and then use them to enter the houses. The police told my parents that gangs like this can even fish into the pockets of coats hanging near the front door. About 40% of the street had had someone in the house and had their wallets, cash, and other small portable things taken. The burglars had not been able to get into my parents' house because, although they got their door keys out through the letterbox, my dad, mindful of the weird dream my sister and I both had drawn the top and bottom bolts. However, the car keys were on the same keyring. The first my dad realised about the burglary was when he got up in the early hours to drive to his early shift at work, couldn't find his door keys, and looked out at the front door to see that the car had been stolen. The area my parents lived in was a typical suburb in a big city, so sometimes there'd been the odd lawnmower taken from an unlocked shed or a bike stolen by kids, but it was safe, and they'd never been burgled since they moved in 1987, 13 to 14 years before this. In fact, this was the only time that they were ever burgled, and they lived in the house for another 16 years after this incident. So I don't think my sister and I had a purely coincidental experience. The next odd experience happened the following year in the spring. I was revising for my final exams, which consisted of 9 exams over 12 days, very intensive. I usually studied alone in my room in college rather than the library, so I didn't get distracted by everyone else's exam stress. I was pretty focused and good at not procrastinating for the sake of it. Sadly, I've lost this talent over time. And this particular day, I was at my desk working when, clear as anything, I had the thought flash into my mind that I was going to call my mum. Again, ringing or even texting my parents was just not something I did regularly, especially now that I had big exams coming up. My adrenaline was high at this point generally, but I was pretty confident that the exams were going to go well. I remember I was feeling quite happy and chilled that day. I wasn't homesick, upset, or otherwise missing my family or needing reassurance or anything. I looked at the time and saw it was about 12:15, so I thought, well, she's probably in work and probably busy. But for some reason I went ahead and called. And I called her mobile rather than her office phone. I don't know why, I usually rang her landline as it was cheaper. My mum picked up the phone almost immediately, but sounded very off and stressed, which is not like her. After a brief chit-chat, she said, "Listen, can I call you back in a minute?" I was a bit put out, but thought, well, she must be busy. Maybe there's a pupil with her and she can't talk. She worked in admin at my old school. After a few minutes, she called me back and said quite nervously, "Why did you ring me just then?" I explained that I'd just decided to randomly and felt like a chat. Mum explained that something bad had been happening when I called. She had in fact been on her lunch break. She usually took it between 12 and 1, not 1 and 2 as I'd thought. And she usually took her break with her office mate. And if it was a nice day, they'd take a half-hour walk around the park surrounding the school. The school was on a long drive with Victorian villas spread around and some pretty lanes with trees. That kind of park rather than a recreation park. An old railway track, now used as a cycle lane, ran in a cutting under one part of the lane, and there was a high wall all along one side and a playing field on the other, so it was quite isolated and not overlooked. There was no one else around that day, and my mum and her friend were walking along chatting when suddenly they heard footsteps behind them. Turning around, they saw a man who had appeared from nowhere. They were immediately taken by surprise, but also very fearful as they both instantly realised he must have jumped over the high wall they'd just passed, so he'd been watching them. There was no one else around. The man asked for directions, and since he asked to be directed to a very well-known street nearby, which anyone in our city would have known, my mum and her friend were even more scared. But they stumblingly gave him directions anyway, hoping they were wrong about him, but they agreed afterwards, both inwardly assuming he was about to mug or attack them and getting themselves ready to run or scream for help. In the middle of this tense moment, my mum's mobile rang and everybody jumped. It was me calling. The man immediately seemed to take fright, and as my mum picked up the call, he just took off and disappeared. They didn't even see where to, he was so quick. My mum remains convinced that my call had scared off a mugger that day. Although the two women were together, he was a big guy and there was no one walking or driving by who would have seen him had he tried to attack them, as they were in a very vulnerable situation. The third and final experience, which I feel is tied in with all this, is a bit convoluted, but bear with me. I was travelling during the university holidays with a friend, backpacking around Eastern Europe. While we were away, she got labyrinthitis. Nothing to do with David Bowie and tights. It's an inner ear infection which means you feel vertigo and nausea as your sense of balance is knocked askew. The only other person I've ever known to have had this was my mum, who'd once been bedridden with it for a fortnight when I was a kid. My friend and I cut our travels a little short, and I spent 2 full days on coaches and trains travelling back to my hometown, arriving super late one night. I took a taxi home from the train station, let myself in, said a quick hi to my parents through their bedroom door. They'd just got back a few days before from their own holiday, and then crashed out. That night I had a horrific dream about a box or cupboard. In my dreams, I knew there were dead children behind it, not in it strangely, and I knew they were about to come out and show themselves to me. I was terrified because I knew they were going to appear, but I couldn't do anything to stop it or leave the room, which was not in my home but in an old house. I was really shaken up by the dream, as it had a very odd atmosphere to it and felt very real. I got up quite shaken and went downstairs to make tea and toast and found my dad there. I told him all about my dream and he seemed really freaked out by it. He's not a man of many words, but I could see he was quite startled, although he didn't say anything and quickly changed the subject. He told me to be quiet around the house because my mum was ill. I'd had no idea. Again, I'd been away with no mobile and calling home was not my strong point. Oddly, she had labyrinthitis just like my friend. Mum was completely bedridden and had been that way since they got back from their holiday. He then told me he was going out shortly. I asked where, and he said, "Oh, just up the shops to run some errands." They're about a 15-minute walk away, and it was a nice day, plus I hadn't seen my dad for 4 weeks, so I said, "Okay, give me 10 minutes to throw on some clothes and I'll come with you." He said I didn't have to, and I said I'd like to, and after a moment of toing and froing like this, he said quite crossly, "Listen, I'm not going to the village, I'm just going to the dump with some rubbish." This was weird. Why lie about that? My dad is scrupulously honest. I just thought he must be in a bad mood, so said, "Okay then, whatever, fine, see you later." That night at dinner, my dad explained why he'd been acting so strangely. He and Mum had been on a holiday to Cornwall the previous week in an old cottage. My mum didn't like the place, and every night had a recurring dream about a man in a tall black hat standing in the corner of their bedroom. My dad just brushed this off. While they were away, in the last few days of their break, they visited some antique shops and bought a seaman's chest. I never saw it, but my parents have described it as a dark wooden blanket box with a lid that lifted up, and it was decorated with really lovely carvings of stars. They couldn't believe how cheap it was and decided to buy it. As soon as they did, my mum started feeling ill, so much so they'd had to leave a day or two early and make the long drive back up north. By the time they reached home, my mum was extremely ill, and she'd been in bed for 4 or 5 days before I got back. My mum would be lying in bed, all she could do, while she waited for the antibiotics she was taking to take effect. She couldn't even stand up to visit the bathroom or get washed without my dad helping her. As she lay there, the box would start making noises. She says at first it sounded enough like creaking that she thought it was just the old wood settling in a new environment, or her imagination, but after this happened a few times, she became scared because it was something other than that. It sounded like the box was making the noises itself, or as if there was something in there. This would happen all night and keep her awake, as if attracting her attention. I should add that my mum was not hallucinating with her illness, and she was not feverish either. She had hallucinations from a fever in her teens once, and swears that this was completely different and she was definitely not dreaming or hearing things. After a few days, Mum became so scared that she plucked up the courage to speak to Dad. She started by saying, "Don't laugh, but I'm going to say something that sounds mad." My dad interrupted her and said, "It's that box, isn't it?" It turns out he had heard the box making odd noises too, waking him up in the night. But he didn't want to tell Mum as he didn't want to freak her out. Putting that together with the fact that my mum had fallen ill as soon as they bought it, he decided there was something bad about it. They'd agreed my dad would take the box to the dump first thing in the morning and smash it up, which is what he did the following day, antique or not. Their discussion about the box being somehow haunted or responsible for bringing bad luck took place on the evening of the day I'd been travelling home, but a few hours before I arrived, so I couldn't have overheard it. I should add at this point that my mum's from a family of carpenters, so knows her way around wooden stuff, and my dad is an engineer. They're two of the most down-to-earth people I know. I don't feel that my nightmare was a coincidence. It had a connection with the box, which was still in the house that night. The dream was so frightening that the atmosphere of it stayed with me for years. I hasten to add that this would have been the case even if I hadn't known the story about the box. In fact, my dad said he and my mum had never intended to tell me and my sister about the incident at all. My sister was away for the holidays with her friends, so missed this whole episode. They thought it sounded crazy and also didn't want to scare us. But when I told my dad about my dream that morning, he was quite upset and had decided it was something caused by or connected to the box, so he decided to tell me after all. My mum immediately recovered from her illness. These incidents all took place in an 18-month to 2-year period. My feeling is that the 3 women in the family were so close that we had a little bit of telepathy going. Me and my sister were also hormonal teenagers, which I feel had something to do with it. I know poltergeist theories sometimes pinpoint adolescence, especially female adolescence, as a time of higher sensitivity or propensity to supernatural experiences. We are all still close as a family, but my sister and I have lived all over the place, sometimes abroad, and I feel as though the telepathy faded the longer we didn't live close to each other physically. However, by way of a little postscript, my prophetic dreams have made a bit of a comeback recently. I began reading the tarot for myself 4 years ago. I was brought up Catholic, not very observant, but was always taught to lump tarot with the Ouija board as something possibly demonic. However, as I'm quite a visual person and not as superstitious as when I was a teenager, I describe myself as agnostic, I decided to try tarot, not as a divinatory tool, but as a way of thinking through problems and thinking laterally about something I might be stumped with at work and so on. I now read for myself regularly and use it in a kind of meditative, self-care way. I'd never touch a Ouija board in a million years, as I believe that is possibly a doorway to other things, even if only dark elements of your own psyche. And I feel like asking the tarot about the future is possibly giving up your own agency to make your own future, and/or a way to really freak yourself out if you get bad news in a spread of cards, and possibly then act in such a way that you bring about the bad thing yourself. Nonetheless, since using the tarot, every so often I have an odd dream which is like a verbal message flashing into my mind, and very different in character to the being naked in public type of dreams I usually have. In fact, they feel a little like the message that flashed into my mind the day I decided to ring my mum and prevented her from being mugged. It's quite everyday things, very matter of fact, like a voice or a thought saying, "So-and-so has a new partner," or "The news Mum and Dad have been waiting for will arrive on Tuesday morning." Just small things, but always very specific, and I've always been right. Usually it's knowledge of something currently going on that I'd have no way of knowing, rather than something that's going to happen in the future, though some have been of that nature. I consider that reading the tarot has keyed up my intuition again. I don't think the news I've been getting comes from an outside agency or being. I think I'm tuning into it myself, and the voice coming through is my own. What the mechanism is, I don't know, but I feel like my mental radio is switched on again like it was when I was a teenager. I feel as though this is just something you can tune in or out of, not a special talent or gift, or even something supernatural necessarily. If it's in our nature to be able to do something or perceive something, even something like a ghost, then the thing perceived or the ability to perceive it must be part of nature, and I think one day science might have an explanation.
Wow, thank you, Rebecca, so much for sharing that amazing story. And again, we've got another one here. Where do you start? There is so much to this.
I know where to start.
Where?
If you get any lottery numbers through, we'll go halves.
We joke, but so many times we've had stories of premonitions on the show, and we always say how awful, because in these situations, the person has had a premonition, but not in time or in a way that enables them to change things. They've had a premonition, but they haven't been able to do anything about it. They haven't been able to enact change. This one is so...
Or they just haven't known what to do. Like we had one, I think, where somebody, like the neighbour's house was on fire, and they went out and it wasn't, and it was like, oh, well, that was a weird dream, and didn't think anything of it until the next night when it happened.
Yeah.
Whereas, they possibly could have done something about it, maybe. What would you do?
What could you do, though? I mean,
in these instances, they seem like perfectly timed, like, I'm just going to ring my mum, actually, and
Yeah.
bam, that fixes the problem.
Yeah, which is just amazing. We really don't get many stories like that where, the premonition is useful.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just incredible.
Yeah, if you ever get any about us, you've got our email address.
Yeah, we won't think you're crazy.
Yeah. If you want it, we'll give you our phone number, whatever. You can call us if there's anything that you think we need to know.
Yeah. But it makes a certain amount of sense to me, what Rebecca says about how the three women of the family were really close.
Mm-hmm.
They were living together for so long, and then to suddenly be distant from each other, it doesn't sound
because her sister having the same dream about the burglary.
Yeah, I know. There's clearly some deep connection there, I think. And it makes sense to me that, that wouldn't just break suddenly because they've moved out. It would take time to fade. The other thing that jumped out at me is, I'm going to talk about the tarot. I completely agree. That is how I use tarot, just as like a self-care thing. You could think of it almost like is it a Rorschach test? Is that what it's called?
The ink blots.
The ink blots, yeah. A lot of people get freaked out by tarot, and I understand why. I grew up being sort of given the idea that seeing your own future was not a desirable thing, and that's understandable as well. I don't necessarily like the idea of asking questions about the future, because I think there is some it could plant a seed in your head. If you if somebody came up to you and went, oh, this bad thing is going to happen, that is going to prey on your mind a lot. And, that can cause you to make poor decisions. So, some people use these divinatory tools for looking into the future. I don't. And I can understand why you wouldn't want to. But a lot of people are scared of them because they think that is all that they're for. And that's it. I don't feel that at all. I feel like you really can use them as just tools of reflection.
I think, like, whenever I've sort of done that sort of thing, the results have been sort of sufficiently vague that it's not like you must make this decision and not this decision.
Right.
It's all like, pay attention to your finances. You might want to have a look at, make sure everything adds up. And it's all just sort of this general area you might want to take a look at.
A bit more gentle.
Yeah. So it's not like, panic, this bad thing is definitely going to happen on Thursday.
Yeah.
It's like, potentially there's a financial issue. So don't get that, and then you think to yourself, well, okay, I won't get that takeaway. I'll keep that 20 quid in my wallet and just in case I need it. And it doesn't give me that sort of big vibe, if you know what I mean.
No, but the point there is that's why it can be such a useful self-reflection tool, because essentially you're just looking at a picture with a lot of different elements in it. And a different person could come along and look at that card and see something completely different to what you see. And the point is, that's because that's what's on your mind. You're seeing one element of that picture, and it's the element that chimes with you in that moment because it's what your subconscious is thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think that the element she was talking about accessing her subconscious and becoming more tuned into things again, that reminded me of what we were talking about last episode with our radio experiment, because that's essentially what I was trying to do with the white noise experiment. Literally just tune into my subconscious and sort of become more aware of thoughts that might pop into my head. And it really chimed with me how Rebecca was describing the things that just came into her head. And the way she described it felt a lot like how things come into my head when we're doing the white noise experiment. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to me as well that she feels like it's a talent that you can work on and develop. And it also actually just reminded me now of when we first started going out and we had quite a strong link. I'm sure we've spoken about this briefly on the show before.
And if we haven't, we just recently did an interview with the Paranormal Burrito and we talk about it on that show.
Yeah, because there'd be times when I'd go to the shop and bearing in mind that neither of us drink milk, Bill's lactose intolerant anyway, and I don't have it in coffee or anything. I don't tend to eat cereal. We never get milk.
No.
And there was a time when I was at the shop and I bought milk and I came home and I was like,
you looked so confused.
Why did I buy this? And Lil just looked at me and went, "Oh, brilliant. My parents are coming round and we need some milk for the tea."
And I forgot to tell you.
And she'd forgot to mention it. But when I was at the shop, literally, I just found myself picking up milk and why am I doing it? But I still didn't put it back. I was like, okay.
I'm not sure why I'm doing it. You had complete faith. You're like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this, but I'm taking it anyway.
But yeah, it happened a few times.
Yeah.
Like things like that where I'd pick up something at the shop that I had no reason to think we would need
Well, I wonder, because the other thing Rebecca mentioned was that she wondered if it might have been stronger because her and her sister were teenagers. There were a lot of hormones. And you know what it's like? This happened when we first met. We hadn't been going out long. And you know what it's like when you fall in love with somebody for the first time and emotions are high, aren't they? Hormones are high. Maybe there could be something in that as well.
Maybe. Interesting. Yeah, if only we could work out a way of testing it. So thank you again, Rebecca, for sharing that story with us. It was absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure we could spend hours going down various rabbit holes related to it. But we cannot, for we have yet another listener story, and this one is from Georgia.
I was 8 years old, which made my little brother William nearly 4. We were on a 2-week British holiday with our parents and grandparents, a week in Cornwall, followed by a week in Devon. I don't remember too much about the house we stayed in when we reached Devon, only that it was a lot more austere than the quaint Cornish cottage we'd come from. The rooms were dark, and it was a townhouse arranged over a few floors, so it felt quite disjointed in a way. At the top of the house and at the end of a long hallway was my parents' room. My brother had always been one of those children who hated sleeping alone, and my parents, being big fans of sleep, had relented and accepted that every night, home or away, William would join them at some point in their bed, even if that meant toddling along a long, dark, unfamiliar hallway. Early on in our stay, William started talking about a little girl he kept meeting in the hallway. When asked about her appearance, he described with his limited vocabulary that she had bow ties in her hair. My mum asked what she looked like, and he replied, "I don't know. She hasn't got a face." The adults were slightly freaked out, but my brother didn't seem scared at all, so they brushed it off and we got on with the trip. However, on the second to last night in the early hours, William trotted down the hallway, got into our parents' bed and cuddled down. After only a few minutes, he sat bolt upright, staring at the door. My mum sleepily told him to lie down, but he didn't budge. After a minute or so of sitting up, he flew out of bed, slammed shut the door, and ran straight back to my mum, diving under the covers. My mum and dad asked what was wrong, and William replied, "I don't want to look at the little girl anymore. I don't like it when she stares at us." After that, I vividly remember my parents and grandparents being quite disturbed during the last day. I know they must have been genuinely scared, as I definitely used it as an excuse to stay up late, saying that I was scared too and didn't want to go to bed. I was surprised and gleeful when they agreed without question, and I got to stay up as late as the adults, playing Scrabble until we couldn't keep our eyes open any longer. Nowadays, my 22-year-old brother remembers absolutely nothing about this all happening and has now learnt to stay in his own bed at night. Annoyingly, no one can remember where we stayed, which is such a shame as I would love to look into the house and its history.
Wow, we've got some cracking stories on this episode. Thank you, Georgia. Oh,
I know. I could see you cringing as I was reading the story. There was something about children seeing ghosts and something about little girl ghosts, and the two combined.
And not having a face.
I know.
What does she look like? I don't know. She hasn't got a face.
Oh my goodness.
And how does something that hasn't got a face stare at you?
But we've talked about this before, haven't we? This phenomena where ghosts don't appear to have a face. And it's that's a very simplistic way of putting it. And obviously this is a very young child, so that was a good description for the limited vocabulary. But we've kind of described it before as, rather than not having a face, it's almost like when you look at the face of the apparition, your brain won't interpret the features correctly. Almost like your eyes want to slide away from it, like your brain doesn't want to interpret what's there. So you're kind of left with a blank.
I've always described it a little bit like trying to push two like poles of a magnet together. Your brain just won't let you focus on the face.
No, and we know that what we see is very much down to what our brains interpret. A lot of times you see what you expect to see. Your brain fills in the blanks, which is why you can miss things if you're not concentrating.
And it's why you tend to see faces and things that aren't there. So it's odd that this is the other way around, where you would expect to see a face and don't.
Very, very strange. And Georgia also mentions that this was one of her first paranormal experiences. So I am very much hoping, Georgia, that you've got some more to tell us. And if you have, please do share. We would love to hear them.
And I'm afraid that's the last of the listener stories this episode. But if you have a paranormal story that you'd like to share, please do get in touch at notonceforyes.com.
Your stories are the heart and soul of this show, and it wouldn't be the same without them.
Now, if you've listened to the last episode, you'll have heard us mention Corrine and Alex of LaCour Paranormal and heard their voices in some of the excerpts we played from our recent investigations. They are paranormal investigators and researchers with years of experience under their belt, a whole host of projects on the go with various teams and well-known names in the paranormal field, and a lot of stories to share about their paranormal adventures. So I'm sure you can understand why we absolutely had to get them on the show to sit down and have a good old chat about all things spooky.
Alex and Corrine, welcome to Not Once for Yes. It is so good to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having us.
Well, now, I think that you guys have got so many projects going on. It's actually going to be easier for us to let you introduce yourselves for a change. Normally, we'd introduce our guests, but I think it would be better if you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, cool. My name is Corrine. I'm a photographer and a paranormal researcher. We like to work with some different teams, one being Legal Paranormal, one being Stage Paranormal. And yeah, we just like to work on loads of different projects, doing lots of paranormal research. And obviously, photography is my full-time job. So yeah, and this is Alex.
So I'm Alex. I'm also a paranormal researcher, an investigator for various teams, and also I'm a videographer. So I spend an awful lot of times hiding behind video cameras and recording the investigations that are going on, as well as taking part.
We like to hide behind the camera sometimes.
Yeah.
That's right. I like to hide behind the microphone.
We can understand that. So we're going to get a bit into all your different projects later on, but I think we're going to start the way we start with all our guests, with the big question: what got you into the paranormal in the first place? What sparked your interest? What was your first experience?
So my first experience was in Cornwall when I was on the beach. I can't remember exactly whereabouts it was, but I was with my boyfriend at the time, and I was only 15 years old. And it was sort of night time, and we went out to the beach. We sat down, and we were going to sit and have a drink, as we do as teenagers. And me and him just sort of looked over this hill, and we could see this cloud of smoke coming towards us. And then it turned into people, and then it was loads of weird objects, and then it turned back into a cloud of smoke, and just kept getting closer and closer. And I was just looking at it thinking, what on earth is that? And my boyfriend at the time just legged it and left me there. So yeah, I was like, cheers, mate.
Nice.
So obviously I legged after him because I didn't know where the hell I was. And then sort of since then, I've always been like, what the hell was that?
That's really strange. What colour was it, if you don't mind me asking? I'm not sure that I've heard anything quite like that before.
Colour, it was kind of like white and blue. It was really smoky. It was really strange. Then it turned into people. Then it was one person, and it was an object, kind of like a table. It was really bizarre. It's a random shapeshifter, I suppose. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and that was really my first experience of the paranormal.
Did you ever manage to sort of look into if anyone else had seen something similar, or if anything had happened there that might have started that?
Well, on the way home, a couple of days later, there was a thing on the news saying somebody had fell off one of the cliffs near where we were, and obviously died. But I never really looked any more into that. Me and him just looked at each other and thought, oh, that's definitely a bit weird. And then that was it. That was the end of it. But it's sort of played on my mind ever since. And my family, like my aunties and that, they've always like seen stuff and heard stuff and felt stuff. So it's just, it's just been an interest since then, really.
And Alex, what was your first experience?
I think it's a case of I've always enjoyed ghost stories and spooky things as a child, watching Scooby-Doo on telly and stuff.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And then I think my first, I don't know if you could call it a paranormal experience or what it was basically my grandfather was in hospital with lung cancer. And I had this complete nightmare where he was burning and everything. And I woke up in the morning, went downstairs to my mum and dad and like, Granddad's dead. And they were comforting me, saying that it's a dream, don't worry about it. He's in hospital, and the nurses are looking after him, and then the telephone rang.
Oh.
And it was caused my grandmother to tell my dad that his father had died. And that's kind of the first, I'd say, spooky like memory and that. And then,
that's very profound.
Yeah, talk about being thrown in at the deep end.
Yeah. I also, it sounds completely weird, suffered a couple of times of like out-of-body experiences. Being accused of falling asleep at school was brilliant, where I was actually feeling like I was hovering over the class and then could quote the whole lesson back to the teacher. So, of course, they couldn't really give me attention because I picked up on everything they were talking about. So from an early age, I was experiencing stuff, but not really understanding and all that of it. And then just moving on, going to my first full-time job, working in a lovely bank and talking to someone else who was interested in the paranormal and stuff, and started watching the world-famous English program known as Most Haunted.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question. So you've led into it very nicely for me. Having got this interest, having your interest in the paranormal sparked as a younger people, then how did you go from that point into the actual investigation side of it?
So I used to go out sort of on my own, just to like the local woods and just have a look around. And I don't know, I think I like the adrenaline a bit of like being scared and on my own and in the dark, even though like I am a little bit scared of the dark, I have to admit. And then, I used to sort of like go out with my friends as well and say, oh, let's go here at midnight and see what there is. There used to be a tree in the woods near where I used to live, and it's a pretty massive rumour. It's called the Black Magic Tree because it looked like a woman had been burnt into it. Ooh. And we all believed it in the end, didn't we, because we were kids. So we used to go around there like at night, just seeing if there was anyone there and stuff. And then obviously it got all like popular on TV, obviously with Most Haunted and stuff like that. And then I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm kind of doing that. Should I join a team? And then sort of a few years later, I did. I joined a team in Wolverhampton for a bit. I was with them for about 3 years. Then I went on my own again, and then I went with Lee Core, and then obviously joined with Sage as well. So, it's kind of just gone from there, really.
Yeah, because I think we went round the houses a bit. And when I'm obviously, as you know, we've literally only just started investigating. Mm. And we sort of started through knowing people that were writing books and were sort of doing investigations themselves. So it wasn't like we sort of started going out and then made to official groups and then what have you. We kind of...
We bimbled around the houses.
We bimbled in and came through the back door.
Yeah, we did. Well, what about you, Alex? How did you get to the point of investigating?
For myself, it was... My work colleague was really into Most Haunted, and we'd chat about it at work and that. We went off and did one of their kind of like meet and greet events at Caesar's nightclub in London. And then I found a web forum where there were like-minded people, got chatting and started going to like their group events. So I went off to Dudley Castle, Derby Jail, and that quite regularly. And then moved on from there to other groups, and of course meeting Corrine, joining her and Lee with LeeCorps, and then moving on to Sage and all the other amazing investigations that we get to do.
So what was the location of your first investigation? And what was that like? Because, I mean, it's different for everybody, but the first investigation, it gets you really hooked in a way that's difficult to describe to somebody that's never been on one.
My very first would be Caesar's nightclub in London.
Mm-hmm.
So it was with the Most Haunted team, meeting them all beforehand, and they did showed the episode that they'd done there and stuff, and had a sleepover. So you could actually investigate the nightclub by yourself, which was really interesting considering it was such a large space, and there was probably about 30 people there. So there was quite a lot of noise pollutions, but because I was new to it, I didn't think of those things. It was excitement. I'm in this haunted location. What can I get? There were people picking up on stuff and didn't really do the whole question what was being picked up or anything like that. And of course, then moving on throughout the years, I've come more skeptic of what I see until I can't prove it.
I know exactly what you mean, because I mean, on the first investigation that I went on, it was a public investigation. So like you say, there was loads of noise pollution. There was a massive group of people. Looking back on it now, I would never want to have to investigate and get reliable evidence in a situation with that much noise and that many people. But at the time, it was just amazing and incredible, and I was absolutely hooked. And it was just such excitement from all the activity and all these different techniques that we were trying and everything going on, that things like noise pollution and the group size just didn't occur to me until later.
Yeah, I tend to look at that sort of thing as like an entertainment event, almost like a primer for investigation. Like, I think if you sort of went to most people and said, right, go into this building on your own with the digital recorder and start seeing if you can catch anything, they'd probably be, one, a bit confused, two, a little bit spooked out. And going on one of these public investigations is kind of like a trial run. You're in the dark, you're getting to have a go with some of the kit, you get used to what it's like in a building at 3:00 in the morning. And
well, I think it depends what you want to get out of the investigation, because not everybody who is an investigator, I would say, is a researcher. So if you're a researcher and you want to try specific things and experiments, and you're aiming to get certain results, then yes, you want the control over the environment. You want that contained situation that you have that level of control over. But if you're investigating because you want to experience something, none of that matters, really, does it? And I think a public investigation can be a brilliant experience to just get a feel for the paranormal and have an experience.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. And from a starting point, I've been doing this, I was trying to work this one out earlier, was nearly 20 years now that I've been doing paranormal investigations. So I was there at the beginning, was the excitement, learning how to use new equipment, and I was a ghost hunter.
Yeah.
I was there hunting for a ghost I wanted, where now, 20 years on, where I've got that type of experience.
Kind of makes us cringe a little bit now, hunting ghosts.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's more that research side of things. It's the experiments, can you get through, and actually spending more time understanding what's in that building rather than I just want to see a ghost appear in a white sheet with eyes cut out the sheet.
Absolutely. And what about you, Corrine? What was your first paranormal investigation like, and where was it?
So the first, I wouldn't really call it an investigation. It was more of an event, just out of curiosity, really. It was at Delapre Abbey, and it was like a public thing. There was about 50 people there, and it was just, I've got to be honest, it was rubbish. It was really rubbish. Not because of Delapre Abbey, it's just the event was awful.
Yeah.
There was a couple of people doing talks. They were really interesting. But when it went to the investigation, there was just the cellars in there, 50 people shoved in that cellar. It's not worth it.
It's too much.
It's just not worth it. Yeah, I don't trust that many people, let alone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was a good experience, I guess. To made me realise what I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And then after that, when I joined the Wolverhampton research team, we went to the Crooked House in Himley, which was the first investigation I did like as a team.
I've not heard of that.
Crooked, yeah, I can't even remember much about it, to be honest. It was so long ago. It was very quiet. We left there and we were like, okay, you know, but it's not what it is on the TV. So I guess I'd go back there, but I don't think it's as haunted as a certain team made it out to be.
That does happen.
They went there as well.
It does seem to be a common thing with the TV shows, though. And obviously they've got to get their ratings. They've got to make a big deal out of everything because from our experience, like living in an active house, sometimes even then it can be months between things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Trying to do a TV show. It's just, you know, you've got to make something out of nothing sometimes to keep the people watching. And I've noticed, like studying up on some of the places that you've been, that you do tend to go back to the same places over and over again. And there's something that I think is really interesting in that, like I was just saying, you can go some places, sometimes you get absolutely nothing, but it's just, I don't know whether it's the time of year or whether these things come in phases, but do you find that there are places where you can go one night, have nothing, and other times it's just really active?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly East Drive. We've been there and there's been nothing on one day, and then the next day it's we look back at our evidence and there's been loads. It's I don't know, I think every place deserves a second investigation at the absolute least. If you want to do some proper research on the place, you need to visit there over and over and over again. I think just the one investigation, you don't really get many answers out of that.
No, I completely agree with that.
I think also it's like the first time you go, you don't know that place. I know from our point of view, we try not to investigate places, even though we probably know about the place before we've gone, or we've done a little bit, one of us has done a little bit of research. And we can have nights where we can spend 5-6 hours in somewhere and walk away feeling like we've got nothing, there was nothing there, and then look back at what we've captured and everything, and suddenly we've got voices coming through or knocks that we didn't hear at the time or something that we didn't notice. So it makes us want to go back to try and understand what that was. So was it wind or was it actually something unexplainable?
And the other thing you've done, as well as revisiting locations, is one particular location that I did want to speak about because I think quite a few of our listeners will recognise it, because it's been featured on some of the paranormal TV shows like we've just been talking about. In fact, we even spoke briefly about it on this show, although it was quite a long time ago. I think it was about in episode 2. And that location is 30 East Drive, or as you just mentioned, it is also known as the Black Monk House, because you spent 5 whole days there. Now, just for any of our listeners who haven't heard that episode or haven't heard of the Black Monk House, I'll just introduce it a little bit to set the scene somewhat, but I have got questions about this place. So for our listeners, in the last few years, 30 East Drive in Pontefract has become probably one of the most notorious haunted locations in the UK. It's kind of knocked Borley Rectory and even the Enfield hauntings off their top spot as the country's most famous poltergeist hauntings. But interest in the poltergeist activity reported at 30 East Drive rose sharply after the house was opened to the public for investigation. The activity started in 1966 during the residence of the Pritchard family and began very strangely indeed when 2 family members witnessed a chalky, dust-like substance falling from mid-air, not from the ceiling above them, but seemingly from the middle of the room. Mysterious puddles began appearing from out of nowhere on the kitchen floor, and that was only the beginning of the haunting. It soon escalated to more classic poltergeist activity, such as doors banging, furniture shaking, objects levitating or being thrown, lights turned on and off, a green substance emitting from the taps and toilet, and photographs being slashed as though with a sharp knife. And eventually, the poltergeist became violent, and the daughter of the family was reportedly dragged up the stairs by an invisible force, leaving her with angry red marks on her throat. Any attempts to exorcise the house were unsuccessful. The hauntings have for a long time been attributed to the ghost of a monk, giving the house its nickname of the Black Monk House. The story goes that a murderous monk was hung for his crimes on the land where the housing estate was later built. After being hung, the monk's body was thrown down a well, and according to legend, that well now lies underneath 30 East Drive. Now, guys, I'm not sure what I think about this legend. I can see the link between the body in the well and the reported puddles of water on the floor, but I'm not sure how likely it would be that a town would spoil their only water source by chucking a body in it, or the sort of how likely it would be for people to build a house over the top of the well. But how do you guys think that the Pritchard family's reports, do they line up at all with some of the more recent reports that have happened since people have started investigating it?
I actually don't know. Have you got an answer to this, Corrine?
Don't know. I think it's been.
Yeah.
I think it's been very hyped up.
The main one, you look at all the shows that have been there.
It's a dramatic story.
It is a very dramatic story, isn't it? And from what I can remember, the reports that have come from paranormal investigators that have been there recently are more like shadow figures and, fleeting shadows, that things of that ilk. Is that kind of the things that you were expecting to see when you went there?
To be honest, when I went, even though I'd seen the film that had been made and I knew a bit about, I knew it was meant to be like the northern version of the Enfield haunting, I wasn't really, I didn't know what to expect when we first went there.
No.
So I went in quite open-minded. We tried a little experiment, but because it was kind of our first foyer into actually filming stuff that we were doing, we were going to try an experiment, and we tried it where we pretended we were moving in.
Ah, okay. Well, that was the other thing I wanted to talk about, because you guys spent 5 days there, didn't you? So you really immersed yourself in that investigation. What was that like? For
me, it was almost like moving into a house. 5 days in the house, doing our stuff around. There wasn't anything different to sitting at home for 5 days.
I think most of the time we acted normal, just like I normally would, especially in the day. We didn't sort of spend the day calling out or whatever. But we did spend a few hours in the evening doing that. But the rest of the time we just acted as if it was our own normal house. I mean, even me and Lee, we were doing exercise, weren't we? We were doing our exercise videos. Lee bought his weights. And it was just like we were living
Yeah, we saw the outtakes video.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Oh my God. Karen must have thought, what are you doing?
So we did the 5 nights there. We did a live stream for probably an hour, 2 hours each night while we were there. And then we went off and did our own private investigation till the early hours of the morning before we went to sleep. And like we were saying about TV programs, I think there is something there. But you're not going to get it 15 EVPs in the first minute and a knife's not going to appear from behind the sofa.
No.
But spending that time there, it was almost like the house got to know you and you got to know the house.
Ah.
And we had a couple of experiences where the bedroom door for the girls' bedroom opened by itself. And then the next day, Corrine and Lee spent the day trying to debunk it, what it's doing and stuff like that.
And you guys got some pretty interesting evidence from that door, didn't you?
Yeah, so Lee and Corrine did the debunking, and we spent then another night sitting outside in front of that door, calling out. And it opened again, and we got excited because it opened, and we were like...
Yeah, whilst we were doing the live stream, so all our viewers were getting all excited as well. It was like, something's happened, so for you to watch, yay! And we concentrated, okay, that door's opened, and we concentrated on the door opening. Now, what we didn't discover when we went back through the footage and edited it, or when we actually rewatched our stuff, was, and it came up because one of our viewers went, either you're very good at faking stuff, or you've picked up on the shadow person. I was like, okay. I looked back on the footage, and because there was a slight gap in the door, you could see this head, just kind of head-shaped shadow, come into the light area of the gap and then disappear.
Yeah, and it's we've seen the footage, we've watched it several times, and it's really, really weird. As you say, there was only the three of you in the house. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you were all there doing the live stream in shot in front of the door, and you just see this. Well, it looks like somebody peeks around the door to see what you're doing. To me,
I'll put a link in the show notes so that our listeners can watch it, and I do recommend that you watch it because it is really very interesting. But yeah, you're looking at the door, it opens a crack, you move around slightly so that you can see through the gap in the door, and then, but it's very low, isn't it?
It's like, it's child size, isn't it? That's what. That's why it's so creepy.
It's really low. It's perhaps 1 foot, 2 foot tall, but it looks like you say possibly sort of head shaped, and it just you see something move in the gap between the door and the frame.
It peeks in and then it peeks out again. That's the thing. It's not. It definitely, to me, it doesn't look like there's something behind the door, and it's just the movement of the camera that's kind of cast something into into view. Something comes in and then goes out again. It's really weird.
So with that, we kind of kick ourselves because we didn't go into the room to prove no one was in that room.
But you didn't know at the time, did you?
No.
What would we have seen? Like, if we'd have had a camera in that room, what would we have seen? Oh, it's driving me insane. So I'm like...
And we did analyse. We spent, within ourselves, we probably watched that video 30, 40 times and trying to work out, okay, we moved the camera slightly. Would that cast a shadow? What do we remember was behind the door, which was a rocking horse and a pushchair. Would that have caused that shadow and how it moved and stuff? What else was in it? Can we remember if the window was open? We analysed that so much. We still can't explain it.
So are you planning to go back, I must ask?
It's on the list to do.
I think we have to. After getting that, it would be silly not to. I mean, I think before then we've been there twice before, hadn't we?
No, we've been once, but we spent 2 nights.
So 2 nights. So yeah, so that's like, what did we get that in, say, 7 days in total of being there?
So we got the move in for a month next time.
You know, you just don't know. Like, you can just keep, I think definitely keep at it, especially if you're getting somewhere with the place and you're getting results.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see if he could recreate that in any way. It really jumps out at me because it reminds me so much of the things that we call sort of skitterers.
Yeah.
And they're like little well, not necessarily little, but they're sort of shadowy figures, and they move in that sort of creepy, jaggedy spider movement type way.
But they don't look quite right.
But no, they're always either too tall or too thin or too short or
too fast.
Yeah, they're never like normal shadows.
Yeah.
It just sort of immediately brought that to mind.
Oh, God.
I know the one comment I keep saying about this shadow is you look at it and it looks like the girl from The Ring just poking her head round.
It actually does a bit.
But I don't know. It does bring that to mind.
I don't know whether that's because we've all seen The Ring and we're all a little bit primed to sort of see that, if you know what I mean. It's almost at this point what we're all expecting to see. If you see a dark shadow that's sort of child height, that, you know, you could see possibly a suggestion of that dark hair. We're almost primed to see that.
That's really, really interesting, because I'm just starting a project on the relationship between like paranormal experiences, what people see, and the relationship between that and Hollywood. So I'm like,
that's interesting.
I've just started it. So,
there's a lot of questions, really, I think, that go along with that. And if you listen to the episode we did with author Roper Wilde a little while ago, that threw up some of the same questions. We were talking about the fact that nobody sees headless highwaymen anymore and things like in the black shuck. And it turns out that people are actually still seeing the black shuck. I'd previously assumed that people didn't see the black shuck anymore because it wasn't sort of programmed into their expectations of what a paranormal experience looks like. But it seems that people are still having experiences of that ilk, but they are experiencing them in a slightly different way that sort of ties in more with their modern expectations of what a paranormal experience looks like. So that is a fascinating project.
Yeah. One we did earlier this year, we actually flew out to New Orleans earlier this year and spent 10 days kind of investigating voodoo.
We're not jealous at all.
Yeah, not in the slightest.
It's pretty wild.
Making our own voodoo dolls, and we got to spend time with Bloody Mary over there, and she taught us the history of voodoo, what it's all about and everything. And there is a very dynamic change from how Hollywood portrays voodoo
Oh gosh, yeah.
to what voodoo actually is.
Yeah.
Because everyone thinks a voodoo doll is about sticking and pinning it against the person you dislike and it'll cause them pain and things like that, where we were being taught you actually make the voodoo doll about yourself.
You can make it for others as well.
Yeah, you can do it for others and that.
You can use them for bad, but it's not like Hollywood at all. But yeah, that was interesting.
That sounds like the most amazing trip. And like we say, we would have loved to have been on it.
Now, there was another location that we wanted to speak to you about, and I know it's one of your favourites because we've talked about it before. And it's also featured on quite a few of the paranormal TV shows. And it's Drakelow Tunnels. Now, for those of our listeners that may not have heard the name before, they're a secret underground military complex built in the early 1940s as a shadow factory for the Rover Car Company. It's 3.5 miles of tunnels, and they used to make parts for aircraft engines and tank engines and various other things. And then the British government in the 60s decided to turn it into a nuclear bunker, and they were going to sort of run the country from there should there be nuclear war during the Cold War. And it was one of these secret locations right up until the end of the Cold War when it was decommissioned. Now the site's been restored, I believe, to its original condition. I'm not entirely sure what you would class sort of that original condition to be.
No, that's how it's sort of described on the website as original condition. But I think it's one of the largest Cold War museums, so presumably to its Cold War era condition. And it's now a museum for the public, but it's also open to paranormal investigators.
So we've spent a lot of time this year before the lockdown happened with Safe Paranormal, which we work with, doing public events. So we've got to know that place really, really well. And when we talk about earlier, like getting to know a venue and getting to know what spirits are in there, Drakelow is definitely one place where no doubt we get something every single time we go there.
Really?
We get stuff that validates what's happened before as well. So we did an experiment where we played some wartime music and we got an EVP of, I like that.
Oh, wow.
Then went back again and said, we're going to play some music. Would you like that? And got the response, yes.
That's fantastic. See, that's an experiment we've tried to do before. I'm really, really interested in sort of playing music as a trigger for paranormal activity, and we haven't managed to get it to work at all. So I'm really glad that you've had an experience where that has been a positive thing.
Now, Drakelow's got miles of underground tunnels. How do you go about investigating a place like that?
The tunnels are massive anyway, so you can get lost quite easily down there as well.
Yeah, don't go off on your own.
So we always make sure, like from a public point of view, that everyone's together, at least with one team member, that no one's wandering off, because it's like a grid system. If your torch goes out, it's pitch black and you can't see your hands in front of it.
Obviously, being an underground complex, there is no natural light. So there's no sort of glinty moonlight or starlight. Literally, if your light goes out, there's nothing. Yeah. And it's got to be, like, even when nothing's going on, I've got to imagine that that's got to be quite a creepy location to just be wandering around in.
It really is, yeah. The whole place is just, I can't describe it. It's just, it takes your breath away when you're in there. And what's interesting is, like, when you use the spirit box, there's like, you get no signal in there whatsoever. So when you get stuff through the spirit box, it's like, oh, okay. There's no.
I was just going to ask you that,
can't
actually.
Get anything down there? Yeah, it's interesting.
And how about phone signal? Presumably you can't get phone signal down there. So does that actually make it easier? Because obviously some of the problems you can run into with paranormal equipment is things like phone signals interfering with your equipment. Yeah. But surely if you can't get any signal down there, then there's less interference?
Yeah.
There is. I will put the one, we don't carry our mobile phones around with us when we do investigations and that, because even if you don't get a signal, your mobile phone's still trying to get a signal. So your actual phone is causing a transmission that can interfere with stuff. So down in Drakelow, there is no reception. The minute you go through the main gates, your phone just dies. In the sense, as sat-nav goes, everything will just go.
Yes.
But your phone will still be trying to get a Wi-Fi connection or a Bluetooth connection or a mobile connection. So you can still get that sound if it's too close to like a spirit box or something like that.
But with voices in the spirit box, and that.
But what?
No way.
Yeah, like Corrine says, like getting a voice across on the spirit box and knowing that there's not a mobile phone near you is just like, oh, hello.
Yeah. So what other kinds of things have you experienced down there? I don't actually know myself very much about the claims of activity in Drakelow tunnels. What are some of the claims or some of the things that you've experienced while you've been down there?
You'd be the best person to answer that one.
So we were filming Most Terrifying Places with the production company. We had a medium down there who was doing like a recreation of what happened to her down there. And she stood there and she was like, oh, the guy who I picked up on last time is like standing next to me. So the producer was like, said to one of the runners, would you mind taking a photo, see if we can get anything? So he took the photo, he took 3 in a row. And on one of the photos, you can see like, I don't know if it's like a shadow figure or not, but there's like an extra person in the scene, which is really, really bizarre. And then a few months later, we were just setting up to film for one of the investigations there. And we had like our tripods, cameras all on tripods and everything. We had a good few, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we were sitting at the table trying to discuss the shots we were going to get. And suddenly our cameras just went flying across the room. It was really strange. It was like forced, but it didn't just fall over. They were like barged over, if that makes sense. The cameras were like on the other side of the room, the base room. It was really weird.
So what is it, do you think, about Drakelow that sort of causes the activity? I mean, obviously it was related to the Cold War and the Second World War, but as far as I'm aware, there was never any sort of bombings or any serious issues that happened on the site. It was a factory and then it was a bunker that wasn't necessarily required to be used. Is there anything that stands out as perhaps being the reason why it's such an active location?
So one of the stories behind the place, or one of the myths, whether it's true or not, I don't think we've actually found out yet, is that there used to be like a Wiccan ritual done on top of the hill where Drakelow is to protect the ground. So whether that has caused something to seep into the earth that then causes us to have these experiences. To go with that, you'd think they drilled these tunnels out and they used explosives and to build up that energy. And we talk about, spirits come out when you do renovations on places. You put dynamite into a mountain and blow a tunnel into it. How much energy are you then putting in there that's then being picked up by these spirits to come and say hello to us?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think that there's that theory, of course, that EMF, electromagnetic fields and energy can sort of fuel paranormal activity, then yeah, dynamite is a whole lot more energy to be fueling anything that might be down there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there are stories, if you look, that there was some accidents during construction on the venue as well.
Yeah, a few people died.
So there's enough history probably around the place with people's emotions seeping in, using like stone tape theory going into the walls because it was being used during wartime.
Yeah, sure. Well, you mentioned just briefly there, Corrine, your photography work. So that's something else we wanted to talk about because your two passions in life, it seems, are the paranormal and the photography, and you're actually working to sort of bring those two together. So can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing as the paranormal photographer?
Yeah, sure. So I'm writing up some articles at the moment just about sort of how to use your camera as part of being in an investigation to sort of avoid things like, say, if it's like you've got something in your photo that's like a blurry person, but actually it turns out it's a member of your team walking past you because you got your shutter open too long on your camera. And it's stuff like that. It's just trying to teach people how to best utilise your camera in an investigation scenario. So yeah, that's sort of where the paranormal photographer kind of comes in. And with that, I photograph, like, do team photos, headshot photos for people, unit stills as well for production. So yeah, it kind of just goes around like that, just doing my passion, what pays my bills, and bringing that into what I love, which is the paranormal as well. So putting my two crazy worlds together.
I can never forget we almost made a bit of a faux pas with. It is really easy to do with photography, especially if you're just starting up. I mean, I've been taking photos for a few years now, but on one of the first paranormal postcards we ever did, yeah, Fitz is looking at me in recognition now. He knows what I'm going to talk about. We got so excited because I'd taken some photos in Leicester Guildhall, and on one of the photos, it looked every bit as though there were ectoplasmic footprints across the floor. Yeah. And we both looked at it and we put it on the big screen and we were like, oh, what is this? It's an anomaly. Oh, I can't get the word out. Anomaly. It was so exciting. And then we looked at it and realised that what had happened was there was light coming from an open window, a big window, and there was a chandelier in the room above, this big sort of ornate chandelier. And the light from the window was hitting the chandelier and casting this really weird green reflection on the floor. And it was just so difficult to see that that's how it had happened, and it wasn't something paranormal. And obviously we were incredibly disappointed.
Yeah. But when you looked at it on the little phone screen, you're like, oh wow, this is it literally looked like a series of footsteps across the floor in sort of a luminous green misty substance.
Yeah, it did.
Like, this is brilliant. This is like it's straight out of Ghostbusters. And we thought, we'll be selling our picture to the sun for 50 grand tomorrow. But no, it was just that lens flare or reflection or whatever it was that had caused it. We were gutted.
But it's so easy to miss things like that because it wasn't obvious what had happened until we really broke down the picture.
And do you find now that with the sort of advent of smartphones, like before, it used to be you'd get a camera and you had to know how to use it, unless you got sort of a point and shoot things. You had to know about shutter speeds and film types and various other things. Otherwise, you'd end up with a blurry mess. Whereas now, with the advent of smartphones, they do almost everything for you. Have you found that causing more of these issues or less, do you think, that people are just sort of point and shooting and not realising what's happening?
I think so, yeah. I mean, with a lot of people, if you look at your phone, you can actually use it as a manual camera. I know I can on mine. I'm not sure if Alex, you can on yours. Have yours in manual and control the shutter speed and stuff. But some phones you can, some phones you can't. But yeah, in like a dark room, even like if you're using flash, the camera still takes longer to take the photo, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So your camera shutter is going to be open a little bit longer, like electronic shutter, whatever it may be. It's going to be open that little bit longer. And you are going to get like the odd light trail, the backscatter of the like dust and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely. A lot of the things that I get submitted are from smartphones. Yeah, definitely.
So you actually have a website, don't you, where you can, our listeners or we could submit photos to you if we thought we'd caught something paranormal and wanted to get a professional photographer to look at it for us. Do you have somewhere our listeners could send photos like that?
Yeah, I do. It's www.theparanormalphotographer.co.uk.
Now, you may not have an answer to this, but I'm just wondering whether you found that the paranormal is easier or harder to photograph digitally compared to on film, because historically there's some cracking ghost photos out there. I think one of our favourites was Woodford Church.
Yeah.
And
we've spoken about it on the show a lot, so I won't reiterate it for our listeners.
You don't seem to get many photos quite like it anymore, and I don't know whether that might be something to do with the fact that we've changed from analog to digital cameras.
I don't think it's the type of camera. I'm going to sound really horrible now. Have you guys heard of a guy called William Mumler?
No, I haven't.
No. So he was an American spirit photographer, one of the first American spirit photographers. And he came about during the American Civil War, which was when a lot of families were obviously losing loved ones. And he knew a lot of other of the war photographers that were doing really well. One of them, I can't remember his name off the top of my head now, but this other photographer was photographing like Lincoln a lot, and he was really, really popular. Gosh, I don't know, his name's just completely gone out of my head. I wrote an entire essay on him. It's ridiculous. But I think people like William Mumler had a lot of competition with documentary photographers and other photographers. So when the American Civil War came along, I think he took advantage of grieving family members, and obviously being in competition with other people, he actually claimed to have photographed Lincoln's ghost as well.
Yeah, I think I have heard about that specific Kent incident, but I just didn't know the name.
Yeah, William Mumler. He was actually taken to court. He was acquitted because of lack of evidence. He had quite a massive fan base, actually. But some of the photos that he took were actually turned out to be like the spirits he took turned out to be people that were actually living.
Mm-hmm.
Which was So, and his photos were perfect. Like you look at these photos, they're definitely double exposures. Definitely. Yeah. There was a way to do it back then, and I know how to do that. So it can be manipulated quite a lot.
Where you were saying like you don't get that many digital photos of spirits and stuff, I don't think it's a case of they're not there. It's a lot more that people don't want to put them online because people will then come and say like you photoshopped that, or
that's a very good point. Yeah.
Well, the reason I asked was because we found that even when we've both had the same experience, we may have interpreted it slightly differently. And it was something that really was brought home when we were researching Thetford Priory, because I saw something there. And when we went back through the history, we found that other people had had a similar experience. But when they all saw something, but there was 4 of them, and they all sort of reported the thing in various stages of detail. One of them saw a kind of black mist. Another one saw a black mist in the shape of a person. Another one saw a person in a cloak. And another person saw a person in a cloak with a belt and 3 red spots, like shiny spots on him. It just seemed like there was this spectrum of detail that they were seeing. And I wondered whether that sort of came across in photography as well. Like, have you ever been in a situation where you've seen something and it's not come out on camera, or the other way around where you've taken a picture, there's been nothing that you've seen with your eyes, but something has shown up on film, as it were?
Yeah, I've sort of heard and seen things on investigations and gone, it's got to be on the camera, and then we played it back and it's not been there, which is a bit weird. I'm wondering if that camera and our eyes are working on different spectrums.
So one of our investigations last year was at Ashwell Prison in Oakham. And we had a situation where we heard a door slam. And that slam was so loud. Because we were studying one door that had already kind of made noise earlier. And we had Lee on one side, Corrine and I on the other side. And we were wanting, calling out, saying, if you can do that again, do that again. And another door somewhere else in the building slammed. And to us, it was loud.
I've never seen
and then we watched the footage back, and it was almost like a tap.
It was really quiet. We were like, are you serious now?
Well, we had something similar the other day, because I was in the living room and Lil was in the kitchen, and she came in and said, did you just run downstairs? You heard something really... And I didn't hear a thing.
But to me, it was so loud. Like, I couldn't understand how you hadn't heard it.
And we were literally sort of 10 feet away from each other. Admittedly, different rooms, there was a wall between us, but the door was open. Yeah. If she'd have heard, and I was closer to where the sound would have been coming from than she was. So theoretically, I should have heard it louder than she did, but no.
We get that in our house because we've got a semi-detached house. So at times when we hear bangs and stuff in the house, it's actually our neighbours, but it echoes off a wall, so it sounds like it's coming from the garage or something like that. And then we have cases, and the classic case in our house is our cats.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there, and last night was a good example. We were sat there, we knew 2 cats were outside, the other one was on the sofa with us. And then we just heard like one what sounded like one of the cats jumping off the bed upstairs and coming down the stairs.
Yeah, we had like the stairs creak and that, didn't we? As if something was coming down it.
And it's like,
huh?
Okay, where's the cat?
Oh, that's strange.
Stuff like that happens quite a lot with us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I've gone to chase a cat into the utility room to get it out because they break into the cat food cupboard because they're sneaky. I was like, get out! And there's nothing in there. I was like, Alex,
we've had a few things like that recently. I mean, we used to have a lot of cats, and now we've only got one left. And there's been a couple of times recently when I've been sitting downstairs on the computer or something, and I've heard a sort of badumph, which sounds very... The cats, when they jump off the bed onto the floor to sort of go and get a food or drink or something, make that noise. And I was like, it's just one of the cats. And then I look over the sofa, and the only cat we have left is asleep on the sofa next to me.
Yeah, and our neighbours don't have cats, do they?
No.
They don't have animals, so it's a very distinctive sound, isn't it? The cat jumping off the bed sound.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of our at-home experiences before we moved into our current residence, we were sat on a Sunday watching paranormal programs, as I'm sure every one of your listeners do.
It's our exact Sunday morning routine.
Precisely.
Bacon sandwich, ghost programs.
Yeah.
So we had 2 sofas in the front room. We had one each. We sat on there. By the TV was the electric cupboard, and there's a lip round the top of it. So we put a lamp on top, because we knew it couldn't slide. If the cats went past, it wouldn't slide off. It was fine. And we're just sitting there, and this lamp just falls off and lands on the floor.
Oh.
So...
Falls off, it went flying.
It went flying. And of course, the automatic reaction is, well, the cats jump up there. Where the cats?
Yeah.
Fast asleep on our laps.
Oh.
There was literally no explanation. That was bizarre.
Yeah, and we spent probably 20 minutes afterwards, like, put the lamp back on the shelf that it was on and pushing it ourselves to see how much force had to be given for it to move, to do what it did. And it's not like a small gust of wind could have done it. It was like a proper, needed proper force to do it. So
is this, did you say it's a previous house, or is this the house you're living in now?
This was our previous house.
Was there a lot of activity that happened there?
Yeah, my old housemate used to get sort of hear a lot. He said something, walked up to him, like blew in his ear, and like he turned around and say what he said. But he turned around and basically told him to go away. And then they did. And then it went quiet for a while. We've seen like random lights when we were there, didn't we? Gosh, I'm sure a lot more happened than I can remember.
I've had something whisper in my ear before, and that...
Very disconcerting.
Yeah.
I think we're followed by a black cat, kind of. We had it in the old house. You'd look at the microwave, and whether it's like...
a cat on the microwave.
Yes. But our cats used to... I don't know if it's like kind of like the symbolism or type thing. It's you're used to seeing a cat sitting on top of the microwave. So the glance of the eye in the corner of the eye type thing, you think you see the cat on top of the microwave. Yeah.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
So have you had reports of like more experiences happening during lockdown?
No, we haven't. No.
No. I've heard some people say that it seems to be more active.
Yeah.
Mainly sort of through social media, but we found the opposite.
I was expecting it to be. I thought there'd be lots more because people were home more, really, to be there to experience it. But I don't think we've had much.
No, I found just before, when sort of the coronavirus was just coming into the news, but before there was any lockdown, and there was a little bit of mumbling about that we might have to sort of isolate and what have you, mainly for risk people, but it was all sort of just hitting the news. I kept seeing the figure I see at home quite regularly, and I kept seeing it and seeing it and seeing it, and it was like very regular, more so than usual. And then with the announcement, with the lockdown, it just stopped. And then a week or so ago, I saw it in the garden once, so I think it's obeying the social isolation laws and not coming in the house. But other than that, nothing. It's just completely stopped. It's not been this quiet in months.
Wow.
So do you think it's like your emotions could be a trigger? Because like you say, like it started seeing it more when coronavirus was just coming out, the uncertainty, the risk of like the not knowing whether you're in a high risk category or stuff like that. So people's kind of tension and everything's gone up.
Yeah, I think it did seem
to. Like being locked down, it's gone down back to where it was because we're used to this, looking at full balls and going out once a day for exercise and that. And
I don't know.
So
it was weird because it literally stopped overnight with the lockdown announcement. And I would have thought if it was more stress related, the fact that it was like, okay, people, now it's serious, you've got to stay in your homes. You know, the fact that it was like, you got to pay attention now, people, that would cause the stress and make it happen more as opposed to the other way around. What do you think?
I think that there was a lot of energy just generally like building up to things like the announcements of the lockdown and, you know, the bigger announcements. Like preceding every announcement, there is like a build-up of tension and energy, not just in our house, but just like in the whole country, because you know that this announcement is coming and you're expecting something. And if you're sort of applying theories about ghosts being fueled by energy and them using things like, I know we're in woo territory here and Fitz is jamming his skeptic hat on his head as I'm looking at him. But you could argue that is all that energy, that sort of nervous energy from the whole country just making more sort of fuel available to anything that might want to manifest, not just for our house.
I wouldn't say just the country. I think you're looking at the nervous energy across the world.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And that on that theory, everyone was nervous all around the world, like not knowing and everything. It would have built that energy up.
I have heard of a lot more people having extremely vivid dreams. I don't know whether you've heard that as well, which I find really interesting. Ever since this has all kicked off, I've heard a lot of people not sort of knowing what to do with themselves almost because they're having these incredibly vivid dreams, which I find really interesting. So it sounds like you guys are quite open to trying different things and mixing it up a bit. Are there any experiments that you're working on at the moment that you can share?
One of the interesting experiments that I wouldn't say we've been working on, but we've been involved in was working with you two. So I know you did an excerpt of that experiment in your last podcast.
We did.
Where you were using like the dowsing rods, and kind of a Esther's method style listening, but rather than skipping through the channels, we just stayed on the one channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we can't mention where we did the recording.
Top secret.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did want to just say, like, to you guys, it was the outcome of that experiment. And I know we can't go into it for your listeners, but it was just fascinating seeing how much was coming through, which you guys didn't know the history, but I did.
Okay.
And you were getting quite a lot of that correct.
And we actually still don't know that history. So hopefully we will be able to talk about this in a future episode, and we might have to get you to fill us in a little bit more about that at a later date, and we can tell us, our listeners, all about it with any luck. So have you tried that experiment in any other location since?
We tried it at Drakelow because I think we were there either a week or 2 weeks after we'd done the investigation with you guys, and I got a couple of people there to actually have a go. We didn't get much from the dowsing rods, but the feedback again from what people were telling us, like the emotions and stuff, validated what we picked up before.
Really? That's interesting. And that's the benefit, because you've been going there several times, you've been there multiple times, then you've got a history of experiences that you can perhaps tie them into.
Yes. And it's actually opened a question, or so basically what we were getting was two people in the room having a conversation.
Wow.
But no one could actually ever pick up on what this conversation was. So all they were like hearing, or when we got EVPs on it, or we had a medium in the room and they were sensing it, was a conversation happening, but no one could actually say what the conversation was.
Yeah, we have that quite a few times when we do it. You can sort of hear that it's somebody speaking, but you just can't make out what's being said.
Yeah, so unfortunately lockdown happened, so we haven't been back, but I know once lockdown comes to an end and these venues start reopening, when we get back into Drakelow, I'm going to be taking recording equipment down there with me, so that almost like a long EVP session, or locking those microphones at both ends of the room and seeing if we can pick up on this conversation and understand what the conversation's about and who these two people are.
That sounds amazing.
Well, as soon as we get the opportunity, we're going to have to book some tickets and come down there and have a go with that ourselves. So you'll have to let us know exactly where it is that they're doing it.
We will do, definitely.
So not only, Corrine, are you a fantastic photographer, but you're also an incredibly talented artist. And one of your latest ventures is actually creating a line of designs specific to the paranormal, which are available to buy. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's partly to do with the paranormal photographer. So the designs related to paranormal and photography. And they're for men and women. So you've got ones that just have the hashtag, the paranormal photographer, and another one with memento mori written on them, which means remember you die. And it's also a style of photography that people used to do back then, like post-mortem photography.
Mm-hmm.
So I studied a lot about that. So I quite like that idea as well. So I just put them designs together and just made some T-shirts and mugs and bags. I can't remember what else is on there now. But yeah, you can find them at merch.theparanormalphotographer.co.uk.
Cool. And we'll put the links to the all of that in the description, as we always do. So I know it's difficult at the moment to sort of talk about the future because everybody's future's up in the air at the moment. But lockdown aside, have you got any plans for the future that you can share with us?
So yes, we will be going to Sage Paracon, run by MJ Dixon at Koontz on the 5th of November. I'll be doing a talk there on paranormal and photography, and there's lots of other awesome speakers there as well. So yes, get your tickets.
Yeah, I know if I went through the list of names, I'm sure Fitz and Lil will get a bit jealous, like Greg and Dana Newkirk will be there.
Rub it in. We're not jealous at all.
You guys should come along.
But it sounds
a really
amazing.
good weekend down there that everyone has, and I'd highly recommend it. Everyone's friendly. You look at the names on there and it's like you're actually almost having, it's not almost, you are having VIP treatment with these people. You've got opportunities to listen to their talks, but also talk to them. There's a VIP party, so you end up drinking with these people, having a laugh with them and everything. It is a really, really good weekend, and I highly recommend it to anyone.
What's the location for this year? Because you tend to have it in locations that are actually haunted, don't you?
Yes. So for the third year running, they are back at Koontz in Coventry. And as Corrine says, the first night is the 5th of November. So it is on Guy Fawkes night.
Oh.
And the Abbey was Princess Elizabeth's home during the whole gunpowder plot.
Oh.
And there was history behind it that they tried to kidnap her on that night from the Abbey.
Oh my goodness, I didn't even know that. That place sounds fantastic. Now I want to go even more.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. I can't remember what year it was built, but I know it's older than the USA, and that it's a wonderful building to walk around in the first place. And then you got the investigations and the talks to go with it.
VIP dinner as well that they do, and then we have a party at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really good. You guys should come along. It'd be good to have you there.
Yeah,
It's on the wish list.
Yeah, well, it's on our dream list. One of these days, we'd love to go.
Yeah, one day we'll make it.
What are your plans after lockdown?
Ooh.
Oh, we just want to get out investigating again, don't we?
Yeah.
We really do. I mean, we had so much lined up for this year. We've probably mentioned before we were going to go and stay in the in a haunted hotel at the seaside. So we'd got all sorts of locations we were going to do out that way on the East Coast, which now is going to be put on hold for quite a while.
Yeah, it's going to be quite difficult. But we're just kind of starting our investigative journey. So we haven't really got a lot of places that we've got access to, as it were. Like there's quite a few of the big places that you can pay to go and investigate. And I don't think I'm confident enough for the two of us to just go, like, let's go book 30 East Drive.
No, although that would be cool.
Oh, it'd be cool.
But I think we'd be standing there looking at each other going, what do we do? I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be concerned that I was wasting the opportunity.
Normal. Like, when you're there, just pretend you live there.
That is a really good point, though. I didn't realise that's how you guys had approached it, and it's a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
Well, the one big advice I give anyone, and it's what we tell people that come on like public investigations with Sage with us, don't think these people are dead.
Yeah.
If you want a reaction, talk to them normally. Because if you've got a spirit that's still living in the house who doesn't know they've actually died, and you go, so when did you die? They're
I know.
Sit there and go, what do you mean?
What do you mean I'm dead? How rude.
And that. So we always go in and like try, ask their name, try, what do you do? And try and get some information. I try asking, almost having a conversation with them and try and put myself that I've walked into their area. It's their time zone, not my time zone. So I try, it's hard. It is really hard to do, but try and not use past tense in the questions.
When you said time zones, it sort of tripped a thought of mine. And this is where sort of people that investigate the paranormal and sort of hardcore skeptics are going to be annoyed with me alike, because I'm wondering whether in some cases they're not dead and you are effectively communicating to someone in a different time.
Yeah, and one of the things that makes me think that could be a possibility is one of the experiences that I had at our old house. And I saw an apparition. It was this young chap that poked his head round our bedroom door and looked at me. And he looked so surprised to see me there. We made eye contact. And he looked at me and as if to say, why are you in my room? And I looked at him to say, what are you doing here? You're not a person that lives in my house. And it really wasn't like a ghost from the past. It was more like somebody had accidentally popped into my timeline. It was the strangest experience I think I've ever had.
I've had conversations like this in the last 12 months, and it kind of links into the film The Others.
Yes.
And I will spoil the film if anyone's not seen it, but it's how do you know, like you get an EVP session and you get responses, and those responses, how do you know you're talking to someone in the past?
Mm-hmm.
How is it not someone in the year 2300 and they're paranormal investigators trying to find out what we got up to now?
There was a certain episode of a certain ghost hunting show from many a year ago that had the most fantastic EVP where the investigators were asking, is there anybody there? And there was the EVP on the other end basically said, yes, of course I'm here. Where are you? And it was like that time slip response, like the person, the voice behind the EVP, they could hear the investigators, but they couldn't see them. So who's the ghost in that situation? It just, watching that for the first time, and like I say, this is a long time ago now, but that just blew my mind.
And it does seem that a lot of the responses you get would work equally well if it was somebody, that so many of the EVPs that you hear are get out, who's there, help. And if you thought somebody was breaking into your house in the middle of the night, I'm sure those three things are probably going to be high on the list of things that you're going to say.
Absolutely, yeah.
Last year, I think we went to Wales for an investigation, and quite a lot of the EVPs we got through there was like, shush, don't talk to them, and stuff like that. And because it was a brand new kind of venue that hadn't been investigated before, I think it had one investigation before we'd gone in.
Yeah.
And I just sat there and went, what if it's someone's hearing us down there and someone else is saying, don't talk to them?
Or telling us to be quiet because it's a courthouse.
Yeah. Well, it's the judge's lodging, so it's his home. So I was going along the lines of, if you've got a medium back then picking up on our voices and they're telling someone else, and maybe it's someone going, no, you're not hearing voices, or it's a little kid saying with their invisible friends, and actually it's us.
Yeah.
And the mum's saying, shh, don't talk to them, don't, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of theories that can come out of these. And I guess this is why we continue doing them, to actually try and get the answers.
Absolutely. It's an endlessly fascinating topic to me.
Indeed. Well, hopefully we'll get to join you again on an investigation in future, because we did enjoy very much last time. And like you say, we're just starting out on our journey, and it's been wonderful to work with people that, know what they're doing and are quite sort of calm and confident in setting things up. And
don't mind us doing crazy experiments.
Yeah, don't mind us doing our own crazy experiments.
We love working with you guys, so yeah, we'd love to do it again. Yeah, definitely.
And more of your experiments, please.
Yeah, we'll try and come up with some more. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. We've had a wonderful time speaking to you, and I do hope we get to speak to you again soon and hear, once the lockdown is over, more about your exciting adventures and experiments.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And that is all we have time for this episode. Thank you so much to all of you who submitted their stories. We love to hear and share them. So please do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you have a story that you're willing to share at our website at knockonceforyes.com.
Thank you again to our patrons and coffee supporters for helping us to keep producing the show. We've been absolutely blown away by your support and really do appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed seeing some of the behind-the-scenes videos and seeing what your support is allowing us to do. Before we go, we'd like to again reiterate our offer to have a coffee and a Skype chat with any of you that are struggling with the social isolation of the current lockdowns. Just drop us a line either through email or social media, and we'll set up a time for a coffee with coffee. Keep sending in your questions for the Q&A, which will be out soon, and we hope you'll join us again for another Knock Once for Yes.